So in this video, I'm going to show you how to process your Camera RAW or DNG files inside of Adobe Camera RAW, covering the entire Adobe Camera RAW interface. Now, one of the first things to do is to download your images. And I have this great video on the best and worst ways to do that. So if you're not real familiar with all your options, go watch that video at some point. But quickly, in Adobe Bridge, I'm going to come up to this icon, Get Photos from Camera, and I'm going to click it. So when that Adobe Bridge Photo Downloader opens, it's going to tell you the card that it's pulling from. I'm going to choose that card, and you have some other options that we need to talk about. Now, first, this is the standard dialog. I advise you to click on the advanced dialog. That's a sticky setting, so it's going to always open in advanced mode from now on. One of the first things I like to do is just verify the location, making sure that I'm going to save these to the appropriate spot. Because remember, pretty much everything in Photoshop and Bridge and Adobe Camera Raw have sticky settings, which means it remembers the last thing you did. So essentially, I'm just going to navigate to the folder that I want to put it in, and notice how this is highlighted. So basically, it's going to store it all the individual images over here. And if I have 100 or 1,000 images, I don't want all these random images. You always want to set up some kind of folder hierarchy so you can navigate very quickly. So I know I'm going to click New Folder. It's going to ask what I want to name it. I'm going to say the model's name. I'm going to click Create, and this is where it's going to save it. And I'm just going to click Open. But nothing's going to happen. It's just, this is the navigation process here, right? Inside that folder I just created, I can create a subfolder. So I can say the client's first and last name and the date. And then I can also rename each individual file. Essentially, the file right now is being named this camera nomenclature, right? MG underscore 9755, which means I've taken 9,000 images with this camera. Like that's not a really great way to navigate and find these images. So again, set up your hierarchy, custom name, and this is where I would put the client's name, first name underscore last name, and then it can renumber everything. I'll start it at 1. Maybe for some reason I want to go back to the original file name for some kind of a troubleshooting process. So I can preserve the current file name in the XMP data, which I advise you doing. It can never hurt, and it's such a negligible file size, you don't have to worry about anything. So now what? Well, so toggle open these advanced options if they're not toggled open. And one of the first things we have to talk about is, do you want to save duplicates? What do I mean by that? Well, you want to download your images from the card. If it's really important, like you're shooting for money, or it's super valuable, I recommend you download to do 2 different locations. Don't save them to 2 locations on the same hard drive, because hard drives fail. It's not a matter of if they'll fail, it's a matter of when they will fail. So generally, again, if it's important, like photographs of your kids and family and partners, or if it's clients, you definitely want to save your images as a backup to a minimum of 2 external drives, or to 1 external drive in 1 cloud service if you're paying for hosted cloud service storage, which I know SmugMug lets you pay for a raw cloud storage space. So first, I'm going to convert these to DNG, which is the whole process, the whole reason I'm showing you this video. It's so easy. All you do is just click Convert to DNG, and then Settings, JPEG Preview. This means just what we see is here. Now, do we want to save the DNG as compressed? If you can save as a lossless compression, there's no reason not to do it, because you're not losing any image data. It's just making your file size smaller, preserving your space on the hard drive. Do we want to preserve the raw image? I always leave this checked, and you can actually embed the original raw file. So this embeds the entire non-DNG raw file inside the DNG file. This does create a really large DNG file, but it allows the raw file to be extracted later if you should ever need to do that. I don't do that anymore because I've never needed to do that, and I can't see a situation where I would need to do that. So I'm just going to click OK. Now, do I want to delete the original files? I personally never check this. I'd rather format my card with my camera versus deleting files from the card with my computer. It just seems to cause less possible corruption issues down the road. Now, here's where you would save your copies. You can click Save Copies, choose your location, and see, this is where I was saying choose an external drive. And again, as always, choose your hierarchy, new folder. rename it, click open. So now I've got copies going to an external drive. And because I'm actually working on these images, I'm saving the first set to my actual hard drive. But remember, a good practice is things you're actively working on should be stored to your working hard drive with one set of backups to an external hard drive. Once you complete the client's work and you've processed everything and you've delivered the job, that's when I would move the first set from my working hard drive on my computer to a second external hard drive. Templates to use under apply metadata. So you can include basic metadata. You can create a custom template that always puts in the information that you want. So let's say I click on basic metadata. It's going to give me the name of the photographer, all rights reserved. It's a new year. Here's the copyright symbol. And you can just click Get Media now. And what it's going to do is it's going to take all of these CR2 images and it's going to copy them, convert them to DNG.
6.5 hours later.
Okay, that took roughly 45 seconds in real time. And what did it do? It created the new folder where I designated it to locate. I'll double click inside. Here's the subfolder, Jack 2022, and I open that. And here are all my renamed and converted raw files to a .dng format. Now, what I want to show you is I saved these to my 12 terabyte hard drive, but if you remember, I didn't take the time to click new folder, type the name, again, setting up the hierarchy. I just told you to do it. Here's what happens if you don't do it. I'll click on that 12 terabyte hard drive. And look, I have my folders, but then all of a sudden I just have all these random CR2 images. And notice what it did. The copies are saved in the original raw proprietary format, right? So I actually have these now saved as the original raw proprietary format. But unfortunately, I didn't think to put them in a folder. But you know how to fix this. You would just right click, say new folder, say Jack underscore 2022. And I like to do OG raw. That's how I know it's the original raw file. Click enter. I would click the first one. And if there's 1,000 images here, I'd scroll up and shift click on the last one. And again, first and last kind of depends on which direction you're looking or going. But then you would right click, choose move to, and just to make sure we get the right one, I'm going to choose folder, navigate to that 12 terabyte hard drive, navigate to Jack OG, click choose, and it's going to push all of those images to the Jack 2022 OG raw folder. So now they're here and safe. So again, why would you convert your raw images to DNG? I think it's best to convert all your camera raw images to the DNG format because unlike many cameras' proprietary raw formats, the specifications for the DNG format are publicly available so that any software developers and device makers can more easily support it. So if for some reason a camera manufacturer goes out of business in 10 years, you as a photographer will always be able to access the photographs that you shot. It's kind of like the Adobe PDF is a universal file format that everyone in the world can access and read. Now I have an entire video, it's about half an hour, on everything concerning the ideology and issues, benefits, problems with Camera RAW. I cover Camera RAW versus JPEG. I cover the different proprietary formats. I cover the difference between the bit depths of 8, 12, 14, 16, and 32 bits and how that relates to your images. And in this video, we'll explain all of that for you. It even goes into the new compressed RAW and then what medium RAW and small RAW are, and even a touch on the new dual pixel RAW, which is a pretty crazy new format that's been out a couple of years. So watch that video if you want to learn more about what's going on behind the scenes and what RAW is. But as a quick review, a Camera RAW file contains unprocessed picture data from the digital camera's image sensor. Most digital cameras can save images in a Camera RAW format, and the advantage of Camera RAW file is they let the photographer, instead of the camera, interpret the image data, making adjustments and conversions. In contrast, if you're shooting JPEG images with your camera, well, the camera is going to permanently apply in-camera processing to the image. So all the stuff, saturation, sharpness, noise reduction, white balance, and a ton of other options are being permanently baked into the image in the camera. And remember, your camera is a computer, but it's a little tiny computer brain. It's always better to let your more powerful laptop or computer do that processing, in my belief. Because remember, with Camera RAW, your camera doesn't apply image processing to that raw photo. And then you can use Adobe Camera RAW, you can use Lightroom, Capture One, or the camera's proprietary RAW software to set that white balance, tonal range, contrast, color saturation, sharpening, noise reduction, white balance with ultimate freedom. You see, Camera RAW files are like undeveloped film. You can always go back and reprocess the file at any time to achieve any result that you want. Now again, in the Camera RAW video where I talk about the benefits, I show you how to choose Camera RAW in your image quality settings no matter what camera brand you're shooting with. And again, Adobe Camera RAW, Bridge, Photoshop can process camera files from pretty much any digital camera out there: Canon, Fuji, Leica, Nikon, Pentax, etc. What's interesting though is you can actually process multiple images simultaneously. Now you can process Camera RAW files obtained from the supported cameras, which is pretty much every camera out there. If not, you just need to update your Adobe Camera RAW through the Adobe Creative Cloud. But you can also open TIFF, HEIF, and JPEG images in Camera RAW, which will include some editing features that aren't even available in Photoshop. However, you won't have the same flexibility with white balance and some of the other settings if you're processing a TIFF or a JPEG image. Because again, that information has been baked in there. It's kind of like it's a cookie that's already been baked and you decide the cookie was too sweet. Well, with a RAW file, you can actually go back, take out some of the sugar, and re-export it, and now you have a new cookie that's less sweet. Super simple. So let me show you how you can adjust your preferences to ensure that you can open up JPEG and HEIF files. So here's the interesting thing. Camera RAW is a plugin that is inside both Adobe Bridge and Photoshop. So I'm going to go up to Adobe Bridge. I'm going to choose Camera RAW preferences. Here we go. I personally like this darker default theme. That works good for me. I leave all of these set to default on the general. It's the file handling you want to go to. And essentially, do you want to embed the XMP files in the DNG file? This is automatic. And yes, leave it there. Do I want to update embedded JPEG previews? Nope. Whatever's there is good enough for me. Now, what about JPEG and HEIC handling? Remember, this the HEIC, that's for the new depth maps that are created when you shoot with your mobile phone. So it creates usually two images so that the phone camera can simulate, a shallower depth of field and do other effects. And again, you just toggle down and choose what you want it to do. I leave mine at automatically open JPEGs if I want to open them. Same with TIFFs. Now I'm not going to go through these parts for now. So you can open Camera RAW from either Bridge or Photoshop. All right, I'll start with this image since this is the image I use primarily in the big what is Camera RAW versus JPEG lecture. And let's just go over the interface pretty quick. Make sure you've heard everything. And this is going to be an A to Z kind of thing. And like literally, I'm going to go through every letter of the alphabet to quickly show you the things that you need to know. This line right here, this is your film strip divider. You can click and drag it to adjust depending on if you want it to disappear or you want smaller or larger film strips down here at the bottom. So this is the actual film strip. Here's your zoom level menu where you have lots of options just going off camera of changing those. Over here, we have collapsible adjustments, and you can open or close any of these adjustment tabs just by clicking on the disclosure triangle. Here's your histogram. This is the button to save a copy with the edits of the selected images that you're actually viewing right now. Here are the Camera RAW preference settings, which we have already accessed through Bridge. But what I want to show you is, watch this. Do you see how they're linked? So I made the Camera RAW preference changes in Adobe Bridge, but it saved them inside of Photoshop, because I'm still embedding the XMP. I'm still automatically open the JPEGs and the HEICs, which is great that they communicate that way. So this is toggle full screen mode. This is your edit image adjustment main tab. This is what's going to bring you back to all of these individual tabs so that if you're in something like, say, masking, and you're doing some masking, notice how all of your basic editing adjustment tabs have disappeared. To get back to them, you'll always click on this very top edit button and it will bring you back to this. This is the most common thing you're going to do in Adobe Camera RAW, is always resetting and going back to these editable tabs. So here's where you can crop and rotate an image, and it's going to let you do that automatically. It's super easy. Here we're going to have a healing dialog box where we can remove objects from an image if they're distracting. The next one is the masking for local adjustments. So I can pull linear gradients down. I can make the sky darker, bluer. I can make any part of the foreground lighter. Like I can do really nice local and quick adjustments. Now here is the red eye removal. So it allows you to very quickly just circle over that red eye area to figure out what it is. And you don't have to do it very specifically. Again, you're drawing a generic big circle over the red eye. And this also works for pet red eyes as well. So the snapshots area lets you capture all the edits on your photo up to the moment before you create the snapshot. This way you can easily and compare different edits of the same photo without creating multiple duplicates on your hard drive. And then we're going to talk about the preset area where the presets are fully customizable and you get to use them as a head start on creating your own unique look. These are just like the presets in Lightroom. And again, I've said this before, Adobe has told all of us that the software engine that drives Adobe Camera RAW and Lightroom in the develop module are identical. What I mean by that is you can make the exact same changes in either program. Adobe said it's basically the same engine in two different looking cars, even though the tabs, the words, all the settings are literally identical from one to the other. And we have a more image settings menu. Remember, whenever you see three dots anywhere in Photoshop after a word or just as a button, that's telling you that you've got more options. So click it. Now that's going to pop out just outside of screen, but here's a quick screenshot so you can see all the options that you have of where you can right click and apply previous settings. You can create snapshots or presets. You can copy your edit settings. You can save settings. You can enhance, which is a very special thing I'll show you. Again, these options that you can look over. Now, as we come down to the bottom right, you have the zoom tool, and then you also have the hand tool. Both of these function the same as they do in Photoshop. So down here is the zoom tool, so I can come over and take a look at anything that I want. Here's the hand tool, so I can move the image anywhere I want. And remember, the same thing applies. If I'm zoomed in, just click on the image and it automatically switches to the hand tool, allowing me to move the image wherever I want. This is the sampler overlay. And remember, when you're zooming, you can pull from left to right. Now you'll have to, and I'm going to click right here and notice what it does. It gives me a color sampler telling me that this particular spot has these RGB values. Even though this is a high bit RAW file, it's still going to display the colors in the 0 to 255 integer format. So I know that 255 is the brightest, 0 is the darkest. So this is obviously a lighter area. And the reason that would be important, which you'll learn later, is this allows you to go back into the basic and you can make your adjustments so that the lightest area is where you want it to be for possible print. So you never would want to go over 250 in any color channel, right? Because you want to make sure you preserve that highlight detail. And that's what this kind of gives you the ability to fine tune. And you can reset the sampler here, which will get rid of it. Here we can toggle the grid overlay, which you can also hit by Command Shift and the letter G. It's a shortcut. And then you're like, well, that grid is way too small. We'll just drag the grid size up. And if it's too faint, make it more prevalent. You have these draggable options here at the top. Now the workflow and preference settings is right here. When you click that, it will open the Camera RAW preferences under workflow. So remember, you could come into this preferences dialog box as well, and you could just toggle on workflow and it's going to give you the exact same thing as clicking on this link down here. So the preset, what is the color space you want to work in? Well, generally Adobe RGB 1998 is much better than sRGB. sRGB is specifically and only for web and monitors. So generally when you're working on an image, you want at minimum Adobe RGB. ProPhoto RGB gives you even a wider color space that even has some imaginary colors that no eye can even see. So I generally capture in the color space Adobe RGB or Adobe 1998, depending on whatever your camera says. And then that's my workflow. I leave the images in Adobe RGB. And then when I'm finished, if I'm exporting to web or some monitor-driven client delivery method or any social media outlet, I would export them, output them with the sRGB designation. But again, I'm going to leave this on Adobe RGB. And the bit depth, well, this is a raw file, so I'm going to leave this currently at 16 bits. I will always downsample when exporting to the web to 8 bits. Now, do I want to resize to fit? If I'm doing mass production work and I want to take my giant 45 megapixel image file, knowing I don't need them to be that large, essentially, and remember, all of this is for when you're done your processing, what do you want your processed image file to be? Now, this is the default here. So this is so I'm not going to check that because I don't want to go in and change these settings. Just whatever is automatically happening is what I want to happen. Again, you can automatically pre-sharpen for the screen, print, you have options. You can open every single thing you do in Camera Raw as a smart object, but I'll show you a way to be flexible with this and toggle it on only when you want it. So I'm going to click OK. This is a rate and mark for deletion. So, I can click and say this is a 3-star, 5-star. I can right click and set the label. Color scale goes a bit off camera, but here it is. So again, mine says select, second, approved, review, and to do, or work on. Now, what I like is, watch this. I'm going to Command or Control 0 because again, all Photoshop keyboard shortcuts work in Adobe Camera Raw. Let's say I want to try the black and white. I want it really contrasty. I want to really bump up the clarity, and I really want to make it look full of drama, like Ansel Adams shot this, right? But then I was like, well, did I go too far? You can always come and toggle the default settings so you can see where you started and toggle back to where you are. This is always super, super handy, I found. This one cycles between the current settings and the before, and you can single click to open it up. You can swap the view depending on whether you want your before and after to be swapped. And this one will cycle between the before and after views depending on how you want to see it. And you have all of these options to toggle through. So this cancel button means you want to exit. Like, let's say you do something crazy just because you're playing around to see what's possible, and you're not super concerned about. Now you turn off the clipping because the clipping warning is messing me up. So I want to see the effect. I know I'm blowing out those color channels. And let's say you do something that's just crazy, right? And you're like, oh, I don't want that at all. Well, if you go too far, but you want to keep playing with it, if you hold down the Alt or Option key, just like in Photoshop, anytime you hold this down, it will change any cancel button that you have in any dialog box. It will change it temporarily to reset as long as you're holding down that Option or the Alt key, depending on Mac or Windows. So I can just quickly reset this back to the original, right? But otherwise, if I'm done playing with it, but I don't want to save what I've done, I can just click exit, and this doesn't save any changes. So if it were still super crazy looking, if I was like, I'm done, I don't need to reset it before I close it. I can just click cancel, right? But I will reset this one. This done button means you like everything you did. You want to close it and save it back to the original file. And remember, it's not going to duplicate it. It's just going to give you that little special adjustment at the top that lets you know that there has been some adjustment made. And this last one, this means it's going to close out of Adobe Camera Raw. It's going to save the Adobe Camera Raw adjustment on your hard drive wherever you open the file from. And then it's going to simultaneously open it in Photoshop for more editing. And here is where you have the ability where you can toggle open, and it's just out of your viewing screen, but it gives you the option to open as an object or open as a copy. But I'm going to show you a shortcut for that. If you hold down the Alt or Option key on an open button, it's going to open a copy, which means it's going to duplicate the file on your hard drive in Photoshop, allowing you to make new changes, and it will save it as a duplicated file on your hard drive. If you hold down the Shift button, it's going to open it as a smart object in case there's sometime you're like, hey, I like these settings, but I want to be able to pop back over at any time while in Photoshop, but you want to pop back over to Camera Raw to change a setting. Well, if you open it as a smart object, you'll be able to do that because then Camera Raw will be embedded as a smart filter, allowing you to go back and forth seamlessly between Photoshop and Adobe Camera Raw. So, this next lecture you're going to watch is where we're going to go through all these individual tabs, like the curve tab, the detail tab. We're going to cover the color mixer, how do you do color grading for correction or cinematic effects, the optics, the geometry tab, which is useful effects I go to all the time, and then, of course, the calibration tab. We're going to use real world images and show you how to do all of this. Let's get to it. Hey, if you like this video and it helps, you can help me. Smack it, whack it, and crack-a-lack it. Take care. I like subscribers.
That's awesome! Whoa! Yes! God. Oh my God, I did! This is
Hey, you stayed to the end. You know what that means? You're awesome. I'm talking about you. Now get out of here.